was interested in your comments at the weekend that when you disagree with something, you always propose an alternative. Be interested to hear what you have to say about that in your next question. You have a brass neck, Deputy Martin, to get up here and make a political football out of an issue that is very serious. That is very serious for people who are concerned here. You sat on these benches. You reduced the blind person's allowance not once, but twice. You cut the mobility allowance, the carers allowance, the carers benefit. You removed the Christmas payment amounting to a cut of 10%. Now, I want to say this to you.
Sorry, but please.
This government, and I want to thank the Ombudsman for the work that she did in identifying and clarifying that these schemes, these two schemes, the motorised transport grant and the mobility allowance, are illegal, are not in conformity with the Disability Act, are not in conformity with the Equal Status Act, and are not in conformity with our Constitution, Bunreacht na hÉireann. We cannot stand over a scheme that is obsolete, that is unfair, that is discriminatory, that is not in compliance with those acts, and therefore we've got to deal with it. And that's why Minister Lynch and Minister Riley, over the past period, have involved themselves in exhaustive discussions about how that might happen. And it's been proven not to be in compliance with the legislation that I've set out there. Now, the monies allocated here, Deputy Martin, of over 10 million for this year, are not being withdrawn. They are being ring-fenced for payment to people who can have a scheme that is in compliance with these acts. And that's why government have said we now close this for new applicants because it's illegal, because it's discriminatory, it is not inclusive and not comprehensive. Appointed Ms Silda Langford to work with the disability groups, with the groups involved in all of this, to expand the remit of those who are involved in dealing with this to health, to transport, to environment, to revenue, and come back with a new scheme for which the monies that already have been allocated on a full-year basis will continue to be available for persons who can be in receipt of that payment that's in compliance with the Act here. It's fair to say, Deputy Martin, that when this was introduced back in 1979 by circular from the Department of Health, that the criteria were that a person would not be able to walk for more than 15 minutes, that exertion would be a damage to their health, and that they needed a change of scenery. Now, those criteria are completely and utterly obsolete. The definition of disability has changed completely. The capacity of various schemes to deliver an inclusive transport mobility scheme has changed completely, and it is for that reason that we cannot continue with a situation that is illegal, that is outside the scope of the Equal Status Act, the Disability Act and the Constitution, and we've got to deal with that in a fair, equitable and comprehensive way. And the monies that have been allocated will continue to be allocated, and those people who are in receipt of that this morning will continue for the next 4 months to receive it. You're aware, for instance, that the motor companies and now guarantee vehicles for 5 years, for 7 years. The current rollover is a three-year operation, as you know, for persons who have severe disabilities and the adaptation of motor vehicles for them to drive. We want to be able to continue that. So we've got to devise a new scheme taking into account the broader capacity of what's happening now, and the monies allocated remain allocated.
Taoiseach, so give the
Thank you, Concordia. Deputy Martin says that the decision of the government is incomprehensible, that it's wrong, that it's unprecedented, that it's unannounced, that it's scandalous, and that you will stand over your record. Now, that's what you said. Well, here's the record. Because in December 2010, you sat around the cabinet table, Deputy Martin, and the Minister for Health and Children.
Would you please allow a reply? Thank you. It's only 1 minute for a reply, and I'm going to rule on this. There are other deputies. Would you please allow a reply? Thank you.
The Minister for Health and Children prepared her memo for government, following a review by her Department of the Mobility Allowance and the Motorised Transport Grant, she has decided to close the mobility allowance to new applicants and to abolish the Motorised Transport Grant with effect from the 1st of March 2011. Now, you stand over your record.
Because there was an election?
Because you were afraid to face the truth and there was an election. And you knew, following the comments made by the Ombudsman, that this scheme was not in compliance with the Equal Status Act. You knew that this scheme was not in compliance with the Disability Act, and therefore you knew that it wasn't in compliance with the Constitution, but that was nothing new to your party indeed. You were described years ago for what you were. So this government, Deputy Martin, this government set aside almost €11 million for this scheme for this year. That money is ring-fenced. And what we want to do now, yes, it is ring-fenced. And what we want to do now, Deputy Martin...
Sorry. It is not ring-fenced for the recipient's teacher.
Deputy, I won't ask you
stealing them again.
Could you please show some respect to the House? Thank you.
No, I've read your press release. That's what I know.
You stand
because,
Deputy Martin stands over his record. Deputy Martin stands over his record of refusal to deal with reality. And the reality is that these schemes are not in compliance with the Equal Status Act. They are not in compliance with the Disability Act. They are not in compliance with our Constitution. And the issue is now, how do you deal with that when you ring-fence your money and you leave it there for this very purpose? And what's required now is to rise to the challenge of Ceann of creating a new scheme, a new method of access to transport and mobility for those persons who need it, to leave the money in situ for that purpose, and that's what the government decided yesterday, to face the reality of you wanting us to continue with a scheme that is deemed to be illegal, outside the Equal Status Act and outside the definition of where disability lies today. The world has changed utterly since that circular went around in 1979, and we are now charged with dealing with that. The money's here for people who need this, continue to be ring-fenced for that purpose, and in the next period the person appointed will sit down with all of these federations and groups, as indeed Minister Riley and Minister Lynch met with the Disability Federation last Thursday. Officials met with the Wheelchair Association and the DFI on the 12th of February, and indeed officials and Minister State Lynch have met with most groups in the past month. So don't come in here and say you stand over your record, which is quite simply appalling.
Deputy Adams.